Welcome into TYT's The Conversation. It is your host, Adrienne Lawrence. And now I am joined by senior criminal justice reporter for Insider, Haven Arecchio Egersitz. Thanks for joining us, Haven.
Thanks for having me on.
Yes, so recently, I believe as recent as April 12th, there was a mass shooting in the New York City subway. And the accused subway shooter, Frank James, as it turns out, he had a long criminal history. What was his background?
Sure. So it turns out that Frank James was arrested around 9 times over a 4-year period in the 1990s. Some of the crimes were harassment. At one point out of New Jersey, he was charged with making a terror threat. None of these crimes were felonies, but he was convicted on some of them.
Okay, so he has this long criminal history, yet he ends up with this gun. What's going on here?
Yeah, so I'm sure you know, in the US, gun laws are different in every state and they're very complicated, but on a federal level, you cannot buy a firearm from a licensed dealer if you have a felony conviction. He did not have a felony conviction. He had plenty of other charges though. And so in Ohio, he was able to walk into a federally licensed gun shop and buy a gun.
So he bought this gun in Ohio, but then he comes to New York City. Is there supposed to be some kind of registration thing going on here?
He did not have an issue doing so. I mean, he owned the gun legally and he brought it to New York.
All right, so Frank James gets this gun in Ohio, brings it to New York, and as I understand, this is something that is kind of one of the holes in the system here, because he has this long criminal history, but nothing is a felony. What's getting done about this, or what's the conversation?
So a lot of experts will note that most mass shootings are actually with legally owned firearms. So you might not have a violent felony conviction, but that doesn't mean you won't commit one in the future. A lot of experts say that one of the most important things to do on a federal level is to enact a law that if you're displaying sort of violent tendencies or a threat to yourself or others. Of course, most gun deaths in America are actually many of them are suicides. So your family would be able to go into a court and petition the court to make it illegal for you to buy a firearm. So especially in light of this, when Frank James had a long open record online of just making horrible threats and saying terrible things in his social media videos, that law would have been helpful.
Yeah, it sounds like it would have been pretty helpful, especially for the individuals who were on the subway that day, as I'm quite certain it was very, very terrifying for them. And also for many of us in society who think about individuals who don't seem to be the most balanced and seem to be in the social media space advocating for harm to others or something that puts us for fear that they're going to harm others, yet they can easily go get guns. What can be done?
Well, that's what experts are pushing for, or advocates for gun safety at least. They do feel that the state system, where laws are dramatically different, across the country, it's not helpful because you can, of course, like what happened, buy a gun in Ohio and bring it to New York City. So that's what people are pushing for.
Wow. And so in your research and talking to these experts, where there were, I believe, from Giffords Law Center, and what more are they saying in addition to maybe changing some of these laws? What more could be done?
Well, they're really advocating for law changes. That's their primary goal. They also say that we have a societal issue here. In the US, there are more guns than people. So even if he wasn't able to go into this Ohio gun shop and legally buy the firearm, it wouldn't have been too difficult to go out and illegally find one. So we need to, experts from Giffords say, and other gun safety advocates say that we need a societal shift where we don't think that guns keep people safe.
No, it definitely doesn't seem to be. It seems that we're harmed more by guns than we're protected by them, in part and virtually because we have so many of them. And I know that there is a lot of talk, at least possibilities of the Supreme Court in terms of its dealing with Second Amendment issues. But I guess when it comes to the reporting and the research that you do, what do you think is on the forefront for this issue?
I think individually states are continuing to make change on a small level. I know that the popular change is that it's a red flag law. So if somebody in your family is seeming unhinged or they seem like they're a danger to their own life, you can petition the court. So more states are moving in that direction as well.
Yeah, because I would actually think that family members of people who are close to an individual can be able to detect first off if there's something that is unstable about them, and also would be the ones with knowledge of knowing whether they had a firearm on them. So I think that could be a pretty powerful thing that you have essentially gun safety advocates lobbying for. And so I hope there is some kind of change out there, and hopefully that is on the forefront, because it definitely doesn't seem to me that SCOTUS or any courts are doing anything to curb the Second Amendment. What are you saying?
I mean, I think that there is a huge lobby that pushes back on the other side. There's calls for freedom. There's rhetoric that people, if the guns are out there, people are going to get them illegally. But of course, as we're seeing, that's not really how it works in situations of mass shootings, at least.
In terms of these unique situations, are there anything else that's very unique to mass shootings when it comes to firearms?
Well, firearms, this case was actually a 9mm Glock handgun, but a lot of mass shootings are AR-15 guns, so this was unusual in that case.
And in terms of AR-15s potentially being banned or limited in some way, are you seeing any movement as far as it concerns that? Because it seems like, why would you need an AR-15 type weapon in this modern day and age?
Yeah, there's huge pushback against AR-15 type weapons from gun safety advocates and some politicians. I'm not sure how far that will get.
Yeah, I'm not either, but I know it's extremely dangerous, and also seeing what has been done with the Second Amendment in terms of whatever its original intent was, as opposed to kind of the modern day agenda and how courts have interpreted it. It's kind of scary because we are effectively killing each other and killing ourselves, and no one's curbing that because it advances capitalism. But that is a conversation for another day. But we also saw with family members who've had loved ones die and victims of shooting, particularly when it comes to school shootings, that there are gun manufacturers being held accountable to a certain extent. We saw that with, I believe, Remington out in Connecticut. And so it makes me wonder, is that a potential avenue that will help advance gun safety when you start holding these manufacturers accountable? What are your thoughts?
I believe that might be a quicker route for a lot of victims of these high-profile shootings than waiting for legislation to pass.
Yeah, it definitely seems like it could be a possible avenue. But then again, when you have a lot of these companies with billions and billions of dollars and the ability to file for bankruptcy, as I believe Remington did, when they were facing the litigation, then we're going to have loopholes and things are not necessarily going to advance other than increasing a death toll. But in terms of your work and what you're doing and what you're looking into next, what is on the forefront?
So I've been covering the court case. I was at the crime scene, of course, but I was also at the arraignment. So I'm just keeping an eye on how that progresses and what other details that come out from this case.
And that's for the court case for Mr. James?
Yes.
Fantastic. And have you learned anything unique about the gentleman? We do know that he turned himself in and that he waited for police.
Yeah, so there was a massive manhunt in New York. As you said, we were terrorized. People did not want to take the subway, but we learned that he was using public transit for the next day to get around New York. And eventually he called police from a McDonald's on the Lower East Side to to turn himself in. Police didn't find him at that McDonald's, but he was in the general area and he was taken into custody. But what we learned in the later days was that he visited and ate at Katz, which is a really famous touristy deli, and he was just moving around the city. So that was, kind of shocking.
Yeah, and has there been any indicia of a motive?
Well, the law enforcement haven't identified a motive, but it was pretty clear on his social media accounts that he had these really enraged thoughts about a whole lot of topics. One thing that he brought up quite a bit was homelessness on the subways. And he was really upset about homelessness on the subways and even at one point referenced, violence.
Wow, that's very interesting in part, largely in part because homeless people are particularly vulnerable. So the thought that he would want to shoot or do anything dangerous to them, it just seems ludicrous. And so I hope that whatever happens with Mr. James, that justice is done and that there are no copycats or anyone else out there engaging in this behavior. But as far as it concerns the work that you do and people being able to contact and get in touch with you and follow along, where can they find you on social media?
I'm on Twitter at Insider Haven, and of course you can find my author page on the Insider website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And anybody who wants to follow what's going on with Frank James and his prosecution, please definitely check out Insider and follow Haven, senior criminal justice reporter for Insider. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.